You're listening to the Vox Media Podcast Network.
All right, so the UFC has returned home to Las Vegas for a special Halloween event tomorrow night, the first in promotional history, featuring what may be, depending on who you ask, the final fight of a legendary career. So say hello to all of you watching and listening, and welcome you to the UFC Vegas 12 preview show on MMAfighting.com. I almost said Fight Island. I mean, it's just etched in my brain. I am Mike Heck, being joined by Jose Youngs, who Fight Island is definitely etched in his brain. He's here from the comfort of his own home. And Jose, besides being able to do this from your home office, which is always exciting and refreshing, I'm sure, middleweight main event tomorrow night between Uriah Hall and former champion Anderson Silva. This fight is over 4 years in the making. It was originally scheduled to happen at UFC 198, the night that Stipe Miocic became the heavyweight champion of the world for the first time. But Silva had to withdraw from that fight. So all these years later, we're finally going to see it. I guess first off, give us your thoughts on this fight just hours before it goes down.
Well, in terms of the actual matchup, taking the storyline out of it, I guess it kind of makes sense for their careers. Like, Anderson's unranked, but he's still a big name. Uriah Hall has had back-to-back marquee opponents fall out. And he's not going to fight anyone in the top five. He's probably, or something like that. He's not coming off the most impressive win. I think it was Vancouver against Shoeface. It was a split decision. So I think it's a good matchup on paper. It makes sense, I guess. Anderson's not going to fight for the title next. Uriah's not going to fight for the title next. Obviously, Uriah Hall has made it known. Anderson is one of, if not his biggest heroes in the game. So I get it. It's not the fight I would have made. I feel bad for Uriah Hall for missing out on the Jacare Souza fight and the O'Amaro fight, both of which would have got him a lot closer to the title picture if he had won. But Anderson Silva's, I guess, the best third option. I should say, and it's a 5-round main event, so loses out on 2 3-round marquee fights, gets probably the easier matchup for him because Anderson, of course, the oldest fighter on the UFC roster in a 5-round main event, possibly Anderson Silva's last fight ever. So I get it. Wouldn't be the fight what I would have made, but so be it. We're here, and we're about to watch Anderson Silva fight, which is always a treat, regardless of whether it's a pay-per-view, co-main event, main event, whatever you want to call it. Anytime Anderson Silva walks into the octagon is a special thing. So looking forward to it. But again, not the fight I would have made.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the narrative surrounding the fight, and it started with Dana White after one of the Contender Series episodes saying that Anderson's going to fight Uriah Hall. It's got to be his last fight. Talk to his team. That's a decision they made. And at this point, I think most would agree that that narrative has kind of gone away for the most part. Still might be, but it doesn't look likely. But it could be, however, Silva's last fight in the UFC. And this is a guy who began his UFC career 16-0. Since then, he has 2 wins in his last 8. One of those is overturned to a no contest, the one with Nick Diaz. The other was a pretty controversial decision win over Derek Brunson that many believe he lost. And, you know, like you said, I know this isn't the same guy that ran through Rich Franklin and Vitor Belfort and Stephan Bonner and many others. But still, I mean, you've covered enough Anderson fights to know, and you sort of alluded to this, no matter what his record is or what he's done in his last 8 fights, it is still a very special thing when this man walks to the octagon.
Yeah, 100%. And he's one of these guys that, like, anyone wants to fight him. Like, I think Uriah Hall referred to Anderson Silva kind of as a trophy fight. Like, it's not going to push him up the rankings. It's not going to crack the top 5, but it's something that he'll be able to tell for the rest of his life. I beat Anderson Silva, who many consider, at this moment in time, including myself, I consider Anderson Silva the greatest middleweight of all time. Probably one of the 5 greatest fighters who ever lived. Of course, you have to mention the asterisk because he did fail that drug test after his Nick Diaz fight. And Anderson himself has described it as a stain on his career. But Uriah Hall gets to fight Anderson Silva. It's a 5-round main event. Uriah Hall probably looks better than he has. I know I said earlier it wasn't the most impressive performance in his last win. But his coach has said it. He's at Fortis MMA. He's a completely different Uriah Hall than we've seen in the past. He's no longer that fighter that's afraid to pull the trigger. If that's the case against Anderson Silva, we'll see. I'm sure we'll talk about the actual matchup going forward. But Uriah Hall deserves big names moving forward, coming off of wins to push him up the rankings. And the fact that they're still giving Anderson Silva 5-round main events against contenders just speaks to how big a name he is in this sport.
And you mentioned Uriah Hall, and with all these narratives and storylines and everything going on with Anderson Silva, he's coming in sort of floating under the radar here, way more than he would have been prior to UFC 198. He's, like you said, he's on a 2-fight winning streak. First fight in over a year through no fault of his own with the Jacare positive COVID-19 test before UFC 249, and then Romero falling out before that fight in August. And knowing how Uriah Hall can be, and you kind of saw it at the virtual media day, pretty private guy, keeps to himself mostly, doesn't really like to do media all that much. But do you feel like all these narratives and all the Silva retirement talk, it's actually doing Uriah Hall a favor here?
It's an interesting question. I don't rightfully know because I haven't spoken to Uriah Hall directly. So I can't really compare my past interview, because my past interviews with him have been terrible, to say the least. But I think leaving media days with him, everyone has said they've been terrible just because Uriah Hall doesn't really trust the media or speaks to the media. We've had some fun conversations in the past, but it's basically those conversations that have been unrelated to his upcoming fight. If you you get those interviews where you kind of go off on tangents about everything other than fighting. He enjoys those. I don't really think he enjoys talking about himself, his fights, his opponents, and pretty much the build up to fight. So I don't know if it's done himself any favors, because I feel like no matter what, even if Anderson Silva wasn't retiring, all the spotlight would be on Anderson Silva no matter what, just because of who he is. And he brings in a whole country with him from Brazil, and that's a whole nother media he has to do. So I don't know if the retirement aspect is beneficial for Uriah Hall's disdain for the media, but I think no matter what, Anderson Silva is going to draw way more eyes and way more questions than Uriah Hall.
Do you think this is Anderson's last fight? Do you feel it? I don't feel it anymore.
I think it depends on what happens on Saturday. If his knee blows out again, like he did against Jared Cannonier, or his leg snaps in half, or he just gets absolutely crumpled, then I could see it's his last fight in the UFC. I could see him fighting in Ryzen or One Championship, or going to fight in that boxing thing against Roy Jones Jr. I know they added some weird belt stipulation to Roy Jones and Mike Tyson. I'm sure it's something like that weird will happen. But if he goes out there and looks super impressive, or just pieces up Uriah Hall or knocks him out, I could see one more fight. He does technically have one more fight in his contract. He said years ago that he wants to finish out his contract. And I know he's been calling for super fights, even if they are against Anthony Pettis and Conor McGregor and this and that. So ask me again after Saturday, and I'm sure I'll have a different answer. But right now, my gut says this might be the last time we see him in the UFC, but not fight in general, if that makes sense.
You touched on this a little earlier. Like, Uriah Hall beating Anderson Silva doesn't have the same weight it would have had, 4, 5, 6 and beyond years ago. He is the number 10 ranked fighter in this division, and having that name on your resume holds a lot of weight still. How impactful will a win be for Uriah Hall, especially if he does so impressively? Where could that take him? Does it move him at all up the ladder?
He might move him a few pegs up from 10 to maybe 9, 8, 7, but it's not going to be enough to jump 5 spots into the top 5, especially because the top 5 of the middleweight division, there are big fights coming up. Of course, you have the Hermanson Till fight. That's a 5-round main event. I know Paulo Costa's coming off that loss, and he wants to fight Robert Whittaker, who looked uber impressive. Jared Cannonier got that broken arm against Whittaker, so we have to wonder how when he'll return. So it's not going to be enough to crack the top 5, but it could move him up a few slots. And like I said, I don't know if this is a fight necessarily for Uriah Hall. I just have a feeling Uriah Hall just wants to fight Anderson Silva in general. Because remember, Israel Adesanya said before his fight against Anderson Silva that fight meant more to him than fighting for the title, simply because of who Anderson Silva was and what he meant to his career. Israel Adesanya said Anderson Silva showed that a tall, skinny, lanky black kid could beat up these big, muscular middleweights, and Uriah Hall is that same build. So I don't want to put words in his mouth, but Uriah Hall has been on record saying Anderson's one of his heroes and his idols. So this is a trophy fight for him, and something that he can speak about for the rest of his life, if he wins, that is, because there still has to be 25 minutes of action on Saturday.
Well, it's perfect segue. Do we have an official Jose Young's prediction here?
It's tough, man, because I don't know. I wish we had seen Uriah Hall post the Vancouver fight, which, like you said, was more than a year ago. Because if we saw him fight Jacare, if we saw him fight Yoel Romero, I would have a much better idea of where Uriah Hall is in his career in terms of his actual fighting ability. Same as Anderson Silva, we haven't seen him since the Jared Cannonier fight, where his knee blew out in Rio de Janeiro, and then before that, he fought 3 rounds against Israel Adesanya. You know who didn't do that? Robert Whittaker. Paulo Costa. These are guys that were many considered to be the best middleweights in the world, and Uriah and Israel Adesanya put them away within 3 rounds. Now, Anderson Silva is a completely different fighter. He's very much a counter fighter, so I'm not saying he's better. He's just probably less openings to finish Anderson Silva because he's not like blitzing in or rushing forward, all this and that. Now, again, and on the same note, we know what Uriah Hall was like in the past. He bites a ton on fakes and feints and everything. If you watch that Robert Whittaker fight, which I agree, which obviously was at UFC 193, which is a long time ago, it's a completely different Uriah Hall. But I recently rewatched that fight just because I wanted it, not because of Uriah Hall, but because of the Robert Whittaker performance. Robert Whittaker basically just does very lazy feints, and Uriah Hall bites badly. Like he'll throw spins, he'll spin or he'll block and everything. And Robert Whittaker is just kind of moving very slightly, and Uriah Hall is biting like crazy. Now, Anderson Silva's, everyone talks about that front kick that he knocked out Vitor with. That's not the first time he ever threw that. He threw that a ton in his career. It just happened to be this is the one that knocked out Vitor Belfort. It's a kick or a strike, if you would, that is supposed to set up other things because it snaps forward and then it kind of judges distance and it kind of creates space, and then you can go from there. Vitor, rightfully so, wasn't blitzing forward against Anderson Silva like Anderson Silva's previous opponents of old. Anderson Silva normally did this thing where like you never notice how he leans forward a lot, and you try to throw a punch, and Anderson can Muhammad Ali duck back and then catch you with that counter, a la Forrest Griffin. Vitor Belfort's biggest mistake was he just stayed within kicking range of Anderson Silva. So if you watch that Dan Henderson fight against Anderson Silva, Anderson threw that same front kick. Dan Henderson just didn't get knocked out. Vitor just stayed far enough away not to be in punching range. He wasn't blitzing forward, but he just got caught with that front kick. So Anderson Silva is a master of distance management and counter striking, all that. This could be 5 rounds of like the Darren Till Whittaker fight, where it's just like, who's going to make the first mistake? Who's going to do this? But then Anderson Silva has blitzed in before, trying to finish you, but it's usually at the end of rounds, a la Israel Adesanya or the Michaels Bisping when he got that flying knee. So I have absolutely no idea who's going to win. This could be an exciting fight, or it could be 25 minutes of you go, no, you go, no, you go. I'm going to say Anderson Silva. I just think he's a better fighter in general. Like, he might not be stronger, quicker, faster. He's just more technical. He's just smarter. He just has a higher fight IQ. And his feints and everything are so masterful. And in my mind, I know Uriah Hall has bit on a lot worse feints than Anderson Silva throws. If Anderson Silva is, of course, one of the masters of it. So if he falls for that, it's going to be a rough night for Uriah Hall. But if he doesn't, and it's a completely new Uriah Hall, which I'm hoping we see because I want to see a great fight, you have to side with the quicker, stronger, younger, more prime fighter. But I just think 5 rounds, Anderson has a lot of room to play, has a lot of time to play around with inside the octagon. So I made up my mind right now, and I say this with zero confidence: Anderson Silva.
Yeah, I mean, all my picks, as you know from watching these preview shows, these are based on gut and like what's on my mind at the time. And clearly, this is a much bigger fight for Uriah Hall than it is for Anderson Silva. That's clear. A win does a hell of a lot more for him than it does for Anderson Silva. And like you talked about, Jose, Uriah's found himself like a really great home in Dallas at Fortis MMA. His confidence is growing. This is, like you said, idols become rivals type scenario for him. But again, he's fighting Anderson Silva. And like you said, ask Israel Adesanya what that's like. There's a certain level of mystique that comes with fighting a guy like that, no matter what the odds say or anything else. But still, Uriah's got so much to gain here, yet he doesn't have that typical fight week main event pressure, in my opinion, because everything's based on what's Anderson going to do after this fight. So I think Uriah has his big moment here. I think come the second, third round, he's going to be off to the races. Confidence will be sky high. I think he gets the finish at some point in this fight, but I'm very intrigued. I have very little confidence here, but that's just kind of what my guts tell me.
I do want to add, I do think the fact that this is in the Apex, in the small octagon, I think that favors Uriah Hall, because Anderson Silva he needs space. He needs all this space to have fun and play and all that kind of like inside the octagon. Uriah Hall explodes a la when you see Gegard Mousasi. He needs very little room to catch that. Now, Gegard Mousasi has a phenomenal jab. I think when he rushes in, he turns into a completely different striker and leaves his chin wide out, way out there. You saw it against Douglas Lima. He's a great striker. I just think Anderson Silva is better. So I don't think he's going to make that mistake that Gegard Mousasi made. Obviously, Gegard got his revenge, and he's just a better fighter all around. But I don't see Anderson Silva making the same mistakes that previous opponent, like the Gegard Mousasis or all these other fighters that Uriah Hall has put away forever. But yeah, Anderson Silva, I said that with no confidence. I just think he's the better overall striker. Yeah,
it's one of those fights that the more you dive into it, you're like, this is a lot more interesting than you think. But it's very fascinating fight.
We have no idea. We have no idea what kind of Uriah Hall is going to show up because we just haven't seen him. I've heard he's grown as a fighter, and I've heard he's a different fighter. We just haven't seen him in more than a year. I wish he had fought Jacques Romero because then I would have a much more confident answer in where he is at his career.
Now, while the main event is fascinating in its own way, the co-main event between Bryce Mitchell and Andre Fili is just bananas at 145 pounds. Under the radar division, in my opinion. I think people are starting to notice that it's very deep in talent from 1 to 30. And I mean, as everybody knows by now, Mitchell has looked phenomenal as of late. He's now in the rankings. Fili is a veteran. He's been in the UFC for a while. He wants that elusive number next to his name, and he's going to have that opportunity tomorrow night to get it. So I'm just going to lay out for you, Jose. This is a martial arts fight personified. Have at it, my man.
Yeah, this is an absolutely awesome matchup, but this is a massive jump up in competition for Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell has looked phenomenal as of late, but what is he, like 3-0? 4-0 in the UFC, and he's not fought anyone inside the top. Has he fought anyone in the top 20? Like, obviously, he's not fought someone with a number next to the name of the top 15. His last one against Charles Rosa, who's great, but until recently, he hasn't even won outside the city of Boston. And what is most impressive with that win is Bryce Mitchell beat Charles Rosa at his own game, and that was on the ground. Almost like he tried to set up all these weird twisters and submissions and all that stuff on Charles Rosa. But it was a decision. Andre Fili is, of course, coming off a split decision too. I just think Andre Fili has fought in better competition. I would give the striking edge for sure to Andre Fili. I don't know how they compare on the ground. Mitchell is very awkward. Andre Fili trains with Uriah Faber, so when you have the joke is like everyone kind of knows Team Alpha Male submission game, and that's the guillotine that every single Alpha Male member seems to have. So I'll give the edge to Mitchell just because I don't really know. So it's kind of just default. We've seen 30 straight minutes or something crazy of Bryce Mitchell's grappling. We haven't seen a lot of it against Fili. His last few losses are to Cater. Off time, I had Cater, Michael Johnson, and Sadiq Youssef, like top 10 featherweights at every time they pretty much fought. So I give the edge in experience, striking, everything overall to Andre Fili outside of the grappling. Now, if Bryce Mitchell can get the fight down and just control the fight like he did against Charles Rosa, who Charles Rosa is a high-level black belt, an incredibly high-level black belt. So to say he controlled Charles Rosa, like if you don't know who Charles Rosa is, that is unbelievable to do. So, but I still give the slight edge to Andre Fili. I don't think it'll be a stoppage. I just think this will be. And I know I said it's not going to be a stoppage, but remember when Edmund fought Derek Brunson? It's just a matter of there are levels to this, and I fought in better competition than you. Not to say Bryce Mitchell isn't good. He could very well be a champion moving forward. At this point in the year of our Lord, 2020, I think Andre Fili is a better fighter. But in the end, Bryce Mitchell might be better down the road. Right now, I favor Andre Fili.
I want to preface this by saying I am in no way comparing Bryce Mitchell to Khabib Nurmagomedov. No way, shape, or form. However, there are like brief, subtle similarities between them because Mitchell is such a stud on the ground.
Yeah.
And even when you know what he's going to do, you can't stop it. I mean, just ask Charles Rosa about that. Charles Rosa in every interview is like, yeah, his ground game's good, but I think I'm bigger and stronger. And then you get in there with him and you feel how good he is on the ground and his control. And you're just like, oh my God, like, what is happening right now? And you can avoid submissions all you want. But if you're on the ground with Bryce Mitchell, it could be a very, very long night, no matter who you are. And even though you know it's coming, fighters still underestimated. I mean, Bryce Mitchell, you don't look at him and be like, oh my God, this guy would crush you. If you saw Bryce Mitchell on the street, you'd probably talk some smack to him if you didn't know who he was and think you could take him. And then you'd end up on your back and not being able to get up. But and straight said, and things will get very interesting, and I definitely favor Feely in that. But Feely is no slouch on the ground. Like, he's not a guy that spends a lot of time there, but he's no slouch. High level stuff about to happen in that octagon tomorrow night. I'm with you. I'm leaning Feely. I don't think he finishes Bryce, but I think it's one of those fights, Jose, and I want to see if you agree with this, that I think it's going to be so close and so competitive that neither guy is going to suffer a whole lot from it.
I agree. I don't think there's going to be a clear-cut winner in this. I think it'll be very closely contested. I think if Bryce Mitchell can if Andre Feely can keep the fight standing for like the first two rounds, the first round and a half, we have never really seen Bryce Mitchell kind of have to power through adversity like Andre Feely has faced in the past. Like, even, I know I mentioned those names before, but like, doesn't Andre Feely have losses to like Yair Rodriguez, Max Holloway? Like, he's losing to like the best of the best at featherweight. Bryce Mitchell has not had to climb that mountain yet. So for all we know, Bryce Mitchell could have that in him. We just haven't seen it. So if he looks frustrated and Andre Feely can keep the fight standing, I'm curious to see what happens. But I'm prefacing this with, I don't know what went on in Charles Rosa's camp or any of Bryce Mitchell's opponent's camp. Like you said, Bryce Mitchell doesn't seem like a fighter. If you saw him, he'd probably talk smack. Maybe they underestimated him. Maybe Charles Rosa was so confident in his ground game that he didn't nearly train as much as he should have leading up to that fight. And all of a sudden, Bryce Mitchell is training on the ground so much that he's just fresh. He's good to go. He's been getting these reps in. And then Charles Rosa's like, whoa, this is not the fight I expected. I know my basics to defend, but I don't know what's happening right now. Now, Andre Feely has been on record saying he's basically lived and breathed grappling for like the last 6 weeks. If he's clicking on all cylinders and he's going in ready to grapple and he keeps it standing and can defend, not only defend submissions, but get back up and continue the onslaught, it's going to be a long day for Bryce Mitchell. But if Bryce Mitchell gets you down and gets in all these real weird, unorthodox submissions and just controls you like he did against Charles Rosa, it's going to be a bad night for Andre Feely. It's another really tough fight. I just favor Andre Feely slightly right now in 2020.
And people tend to forget that if there are just a couple of different people sitting at those judges' tables, Andre Feely could be on a 7-fight winning streak right now, because
100%.
There are a lot of people who felt he beat Michael Johnson. There's a lot of people who thought he beat Sadiq Youssef too. That was a great fight, and the Jourdain fight was just awesome. Just an incredible fight. Really looking forward to that. Main card rounds out with Kevin Holland taking on newcomer Charles Ontiveros. Of course, Ontiveros coming in on 3 days' notice. What a year it's been for him. Greg Hardy missed weight on his first attempt, made it just under the mark. It was at 264.5 on the second attempt. He makes it. He takes on the crochet boss, Maurice Green. And then Bobby King Green, looking for his 4th win in 128 days, taking on Thiago Moises, one of the biggest stars of 2020 right now. Bobby Green, what a move and some moving and shaking that he's had. And he's saying he's already got a fight booked in December too, which is just wild. This could be one of the best years, for a lot of guys in the UFC. This is just wild. But as we typically like to do here, Jose, we like to shine a light on fighters and or fights that may not be getting that love heading into tomorrow night. So what is flying under the radar that should be getting some more love?
Well, I'm going to say, I listened to your weigh-in show, and you guys are arguing about athleticism and this and that and who's such. Like, I agree. In the end, you don't have to be athletic to be successful in the UFC heavyweight division. Like Mark Hunt was successful. We've seen a lot of these guys that just hit hard, and it's the heavyweight division. One punch, you go to bed. But Greg Hardy is an NFL Pro Bowler. He has 26 sacks in 2 seasons. Like, enough of this who's the most athletic heavyweight. Greg Hardy is the most athletic heavyweight in the heavyweight division right now. He's like 30 or 29 or something like that. He's in the prime of his career. The dude went to the NFL. And was a Pro Bowler. Had almost 30 sacks in 2 years. He's the most athletic heavyweight right now. He's not the best fighter by any means. He's not the most skilled. He's not the toughest. He's not the hardest hitting. In terms of athleticism, Greg Hardy is a different level of athlete right now. He is like, the whole thing that Dominic Reyes was like, oh, Jon Jones has never fought an athlete, this and that. Greg Hardy is still on a level above that. He reached the pinnacle of his sport, the most popular sport in America, and was one of the best at it. So he's And unfortunately, obviously the narrative surrounding him, everyone knows the narrative. It's unfortunate because he's doing everything right. He's going to the good gym. He has the right coaches. He's taking the slow build. He was brutally honest in his virtual media day where he's saying, I'm a B-level fighter now. I came into the UFC, I was D level, and now I'm a B level. It's refreshing to hear. It's just unfortunate that the narrative is always there because you can't not talk about it and you can't not think about it. Now, Bobby Green, like you said, is awesome. I can't remember who called him out, but someone called him out on Fight Island, and he basically went full Candyman on him. And was like, you say my name, I'm going to appear. I just had to throw that in to keep in the Halloween narrative we're going right now. So Bobby Green is a terrifying human. Anyone that has skull tattoos, like when I say skull tattoos, I mean tattoos on his skull, you're a different level of human being too, because you can take some serious pain. Bobby Green is such a joy to watch. I've been at pretty much all of his fights outside of this one. And Dustin Jacoby, I was at his Contender Series fight. He was awesome. He was throwing standing elbows and I can't remember his opponent's name, but basically just hit him with everything but the kitchen sink. And I even asked Dustin Jacoby, like, when you fought in Glory, you can't throw elbows. And he was just winging them in there. He's like, it was fun, man. But then he said it hurt. He had to. What did he say? Like when you train kickboxing stuff, you have those big gloves on, and you can block. You can block things much easier with kickboxing and boxing gloves. And he said the 4-ounce gloves really caught him off guard because his hands hurt so much. Now, who's he fighting? Justin Ledet, if I'm not mistaken. Justin Ledet has pretty much lost to everyone that was a prospect at light heavyweight. And obviously has some very impressive wins at heavyweight, drops back down, and just gets thrown into wood chipper after wood chipper after wood chipper. So I like Dustin Jacoby. He's a very underrated interview because he loves talking fighting, very brutally honest. Where his first 2 UFC fights before getting cut, one of them didn't even air on Fuel TV. Like, it was cut for time. And the other one was like a Facebook prelim back in the day. So the fact that he's getting his second chance at the UFC, I'm very excited for that. Unfortunately, Courtney Casey can't be on this card because her opponent had weight cutting issues. I'm always excited to see Arizona's own Courtney Casey. She is like low key. She kind of has like she could scrap. Like, she's not going to take shit from anyone. She's going to throw down, like, bite her mouthpiece. So obviously the Crochet Boss, I always enjoy watching him fight. A lot of individual fighters I'm excited to see, but selfishly, outside the main and co-main, I'm very excited to see Dustin Jacoby back inside the octagon.
Yeah, you can find some stories in like all of these prelim fights, like Miles 100%. John, even the first one, Miles Johns, one of the prospects at 35, coming off the first loss of his career to Mario Bautista.
I was at his fight in Houston, and then Kevin Natividad, I've commentated one of his fights in Arizona.
So there you go. That's a fun fight. Of course, the Natividad story to get to the UFC and the Brian Kelleher situation and the COVID test. I mean, so much going on there. Dustin Jacoby, like you mentioned, first fight in almost 9 years. Sean Strickland back after almost 2 years after that motorcycle accident. After you watch this, go to MMAfighting.com and read Damon Martin's story on Sean Strickland. It's pretty unbelievable. He takes on Jack Marshman, who missed weight, so he gets a little extra money in his pocket. Adrian Yanez making his UFC debut against Victor Rodriguez, also making his debut. But Jose, you already know what I'm picking. Oh, Alex Hernandez.
That's why I didn't say it.
Alex Hernandez versus Chris Gritzmacher is a really interesting fight because you have Gritzmacher, who couldn't build upon the momentum of that Joe Lozon win, which he left him in a bloody heap in Brooklyn. And then he got hurt. It was a neck injury, then a knee injury. And it's been well over 2 years since he's competed. So interested to see what he looks like getting back in there. And then you have Alex Hernandez, who basically got thrust right into the top 15 after like under a minute of octagon time with Beneil Dariush. Beats OAM, then the Cerrone loss, which everyone seems to remember because it was like the classic heel turn for Hernandez. Gets the win over Trinaldo, fight that a lot of people felt he didn't win. And then he gets finished. And then he gets finished by Drew Dober. And it was interesting when I talked to Alex, he said, I knew in the middle of that fight that I needed to leave San Antonio. Like, I'm thinking about it as I'm getting punched in the face by Drew Dober. Yeah, I'm not really ready for this. I need to make some changes. He did that, went to Colorado. He was brought in with open arms by Factory X, training with guys like Brandon Royval, guys like Yusuf Salal, getting, good work with Mark Montoya and all those guys. Like, it seems to me like he's in a much different place. He's never had a chance to really grow up in the UFC. He just got thrust right into the killers right away. So I think this is a good test for him to see where he's really at and see those changes made. But Chris Gritzmacher is going to come right after him and try to do what he did to Joe Lozon in that fight. So that's a really interesting one. And of course, Bobby Green, man, this guy's making a case not just to be the most, the best fighter at 155 this year in terms of wins, but this guy's like trying to get some nominations for Fighter of the Year. If he can win this one and then fight in December, win again and go 5-0, that's insane. That would tie
the UFC record for most wins in a calendar year. I believe Neil Magny and Roger Huerta went 5-0 in one calendar year.
It's so crazy. So this will be a record for him if he wins tomorrow. Four wins in 128 days. That'll be some UFC history. So there's a lot to like tomorrow. A sneaky good card on Halloween. It'll be spooky. It'll be fun, and we're all going to watch it. And Jose, you'll be able to watch it from home, which is even better. Alex Savas, our boots on the ground, giving you a weekend off. So
doing phenomenal work too. She's killing it out there.
Absolutely. So the prelims kick off at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Excellent. And then the main card kicks off at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll have all of your coverage. Alex will have you all the backstage interviews. We'll have a post-fight show, all the recaps on MMAfighting.com. So you know where to go. Your one-stop shop. For Jose Youngs, I am Mike Heck. Another preview show in the books. We'll see you tomorrow night.
You're listening to the Vox Media Podcast Network.